equipping you to navigate your grief journey after child loss. This is the Hope After Child Loss podcast. On each episode, we explore the many challenges of grief as guests share their stories of loss. It's also a place where you will hear about God showing up in our darkest moments and restoring meaning, purpose, and hope to shattered lives. Welcome to another episode of the Hope After Child Loss podcast. I am Greg Buffkin, and I'm so glad you could join us today. I'm going to be talking today with Richard Wands, Richard's wife, Stacey, a recent guest, and share her story. I thought it would be really interesting to have an episode dedicated to both the husband and wife's grief journey. It's rare that I actually get to meet or talk with the spouse of any of my guests, so this is a special treat. And I think you guys will find that it is as encouraging and offers as much hope as his wife Stacey's did. So here is my conversation with Richard. Well, Richard, welcome to our podcast. It's great to have you today.
Thanks for having me, Greg. I appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. You know, I was telling our listeners earlier that your wife, Stacey, was a very recent guest on the podcast and shared her story from a mom's perspective about the grief journey that you guys have been on for quite a number of years now after losing your sweet daughter, Trinity. I'm glad that you joined us today, Richard, because I think it's good for listeners to be able to hear not just a mom's perspective, but to hear the impact that grief has on dads as well. So I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Well, thanks, Greg. I mean, it really is important to get the dad's perspective too. I think a lot of times when people think about losing a child, they immediately think about the mom losing the child. But, we as fathers, we lose the children too. And, it impacts us all differently. And it certainly impacted Stacey and I in a very profound way. She has felt called to share her story, her testimony for many years. And she actually wrote a book about it in 2024. I got to write a chapter in that book from the husband's perspective, the dad's perspective. So this is kind of like the video version of that, almost, so to speak. Yeah, it was an amazing journey of one that was very difficult, but also one that had a very profound impact on our lives moving forward.
Yeah, and I actually just finished reading that section that you wrote yesterday. Yeah, and you did a really great job. And it was brief, but you encapsulated a lot of things in those few pages and gave us, I thought, a very accurate glimpse of what it's like for a husband and a dad. Having been there myself, I could absolutely identify with 100% of what you were talking about. So I would encourage anybody who, if you didn't listen to Stacey's episode, go back and listen to it. And we talk about her book in that episode. And there is a link in her episode. And I will probably also include a link in your episode, Richard, to about that book. You said a minute ago that how grief affects us so profoundly. And it does that in ways that we could have never in a million years expected. We don't come prepared for that. We don't get the course in parenting, which would include the possibility of losing a child and what we do if that happens. It's just, you kind of fly by the seat of your pants when it happens. And it's so traumatic. You just kind of shut down. I know that, when you and I were talking on the phone a few days ago, the phrase that you used was you became barely functional. And I'd like for you to talk about that, because I know that listeners typically, like you said a few minutes ago, associate that with moms. And they somehow, I think people think that it doesn't affect dads in such a profound way. But the truth of the matter is it does. So let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're going through a situation that, like you said, you have no experience, you have no training, you don't know how to deal with it.
Right.
And you get to the point where you're almost kind of like you're paused. You feel incapacitated. You don't know what to do. You don't know what to think. You feel barely functional. Like you don't know how you're even getting by. And I think when we were talking about that, I talked about how we had friends that helped us out in that time. And basically what they did is they took care of basic functions. Like we weren't thinking about, oh, what are we going to make for dinner tonight? Where are we, how are we getting from point A to point B? It's like we couldn't even think about some of that stuff. We were just, we were like zombies almost. I mean,
Yeah.
and one of the things that I remember feeling like, I'm like, I just want to crawl into a hole and just go into like a coma for like a year, because thinking that maybe it'd be better in a year. And the thing is, well, you can't do that, because you have to grieve through it. You have to get through it. You have to process it in order to get, to that year. But at first it is so, it just stops you dead in your tracks. You just don't know what to do. I mean, I don't know
Yeah.
what to say. Yeah.
Yeah. It blinds you in some respects from being able to see all the other things that are going on in life. As you said, you feel like you've been stopped in your tracks, and the whole rest of the world continues to operate as it always has, but it feels like your life has come to an absolute dead standstill,
Yeah.
and we don't know what to do with that.
Yeah. It's one thing that I thought that was really interesting. I think we kind of touched on this on some of the pre-questions, but Stacey and I, it didn't obviously tear us apart as far as our marriage is concerned. And I think one of the things that was really interesting about the whole situation is we didn't let little stuff bother us. We were so consumed with the grief and so consumed with, trying to support each other as best we could, that our marriage was, it's weird to say this, but I don't think our marriage was ever easier, because we just focused on each other and we didn't let stuff just tear us apart. I mean, even though we had differences in the way we grieved, it was easy in that regard, because it was simple.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that doesn't sound weird at all. I think that level of trauma has the ability to either shred a marriage apart, or as we know in other situations in life, how trauma can bond people. And I think when the marriage is already on a solid footing, and I know for you guys it was, I do think that it can make that marriage all that much stronger. It's not a way that you would choose for it to happen, of course, but it affected ours the same way, Richard. And I can say that 9 years later, we're closer than we've ever been. And you hear all those awful statistics that most marriages dissolve after the death of a child. Actually, the truth of the matter is those statistics are really more in favor of the marriage surviving. It's only about 12 to 16% of marriages end in divorce after the death of a child, which is much better than the general divorce statistics.
Well, that's encouraging. Yeah, I didn't realize it was like that. I kept hearing that same thing about how it tears people apart. And I mean, our marriage was strong, but it wasn't. We still had differences. I mean, our faith wasn't in the same place, certainly, and
Right.
our faith was something that we both reacted to it differently, and it was something that helped Stacey get through her grieving more so than
Sure.
me first. So
Yeah. And we'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. I want to go back to something, and that's, you talked about how you and Stacey grieve differently. And that is true for all men and women. Every individual grieves differently, but men and women also grieve differently. Can you talk a little bit about what that looked like with you guys?
well, I mean, we have a unique situation because I think our roles are somewhat reversed.
I
Stacey
read I
is
read where you said that, and
yeah,
I can identify with that.
yeah, Stacey is more, she internalizes things, and I kind of wear my heart on my sleeve. So that I think is somewhat opposite of what most men and women are like. And so that was difficult because, it's like, we talked about going to a Christian counselor at one time, and it didn't really help me because I mean, I think counselors are there to help you kind of get things out, and I don't have a problem getting things out. I don't have a problem sharing my opinion or sharing my feelings. Stacey internalizes things differently, but we somehow were able to support each other the way we, just as best we could, and it worked. One thing I think that was different was because I was able to get things out so much, I wasn't internalizing things. I went back to work sooner than she did. I mean, she just felt like she wanted to just stare at the walls for a couple months. And after like, I think it was like 3 or 4 weeks, I'm like, I need to get out of the house. I can't just sit here and stew and just tear myself up just thinking about it. I need something else to think about because, I mean, this is already occupying, at the time, it was occupying 100% of my thoughts. And I need to get it down to where it's not 100% of my thoughts because I just can't handle that kind of self-destruction. So I started going back to work, and I was a field rep. I was a field sales rep for a biotech pharma supplier at the time. And I was like, most of the time I could get back to work by just emailing people, and, emails and stuff was as very non face to face. And I didn't have to deal with, trying to hold my emotions in or trying to keep it together. But then, I don't know, after like 3 or 4 weeks, I actually did go visit some accounts, and that was quite challenging because I I had stock rooms at these accounts at these pharmaceutical and biotech companies, and it was a good way to get repeat business. If your stuff's in the stock room, they're going to go to the stock room and get your stuff. And I'm like, okay, I can go into my stock rooms, I can breeze in and out, do my inventory, get the orders set up, and I don't have to really talk to anybody. And I remember the first time, or one of the first times I went in, I went to see an account, and there was a woman there, a young woman that I'd see all the time, and I walked in there, and she didn't know what happened, and she said, how's it like being in daddy?
Man.
I had to, oh my gosh, that was probably one of the most difficult things I had to do. I had to hold my composure together, keep myself together without just breaking down, and explaining to her that we lost our child, that she didn't make it out of the NICU. And I mean, I felt terrible because of my situation, but I also felt terrible that someone else just walked into that.
Yeah. Yeah.
She couldn't have known, and she felt terrible too. But that was really painful. I mean, other customers knew because my manager or my colleagues would go into the account and say, "Hey, Richard's going to be out for a little bit. He lost the child." And I had one account where they passed out a card. Like, everybody in the chemistry department, biology department, all signed that card and sent it to me, and that was pretty amazing. But it was, I had to get out. I had to do something to take my mind off the grief.
I think that it demonstrates those differences, that we have both as individuals and as men and women. And the thing that I think that you guys did that's so important is you respected each other's ways of grieving. Sometimes I think it's easy if your spouse is grieving in a way that you don't grieve and you don't understand why they're grieving the way that they are. Sometimes, spouses can get upset with each other and
Well,
think,
she did not understand why I wanted to go back to work, and I think it took her a while to realize that.
yeah,
But she didn't. We didn't get into a fight or anything. She just was like, she just couldn't understand it.
yeah. And I think it's not uncommon for men to want to go back to work because I think it's a distraction. And I think it's a way of not feeling like you're consumed with the grief. And I think part of that too goes to the differences between men and women because men have this ability to compartmentalize. We can put things in different things in different boxes. And when we need this particular box, we can pull it off the shelf and we can walk that out today. And then we put it back on the shelf. Women are not wired like that at all, are they? I mean, it's just everything is intertwined together. So everything on their journey looks very different than ours. And I'm not sure that I'm making a whole lot of sense there, but I think if you've lived it, you understand it.
No, I completely get it. I mean, I kind of use that approach every day, or I use that approach all the time in work because I was a sales rep, and didn't matter how your day was. You just go and talk to a customer, and boom, you just turn it on, and you are the sales rep. And you didn't matter if you were having a bad day. You can compartmentalize that and focus on what the task at hand was, and that was talking to that customer. So that was always something I was able to do. And, sometimes I get home from work, and if you were having a bad day, like, I think when we lived in California, we worked for a supplier that was not always the prime supplier. So we were always having to kind of fight for that stuff. And we used to, like, well, we had some rough days, and we'd get home, and it's like, you're kind of exhausted. And, Stacey would be like, what's the matter? I'm like, I just had, spend the whole day trying to put a smile on my face when it was really difficult. So you have to compartmentalize that.
Yeah. And I can remember when I first went back to work, because as a rep, you're always quote unquote on.
Yes.
You have to be on for your customers. And, it's normally not that difficult to do. But when you are particularly in that early season of grief, and it's so heavy and it's so painful, I found it to be absolutely exhausting to have to go and be on all day with how I was really feeling inside.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because you can't express that to everybody that you're with. Most of them wouldn't be able to handle it. They wouldn't know what to do. You know that you've got a job to do. You've got products that you promote, and so you have to be available for that part of it. So that compartmentalization process, it was just exhausting for me for a while.
Yeah, the being on is a very accurate way. I've used that phrase before, and thank you for bringing that up. And you reminded me of another thing too. You talked about use all your energy just to kind of to be on and whatnot. And I mentioned something earlier about barely being functional. And if any of your listeners are people that are not necessarily someone who's lost a loved one, but maybe they're trying to support someone who lost a loved one. That's one thing that we did have really a lot of support is people that were, man, we were at the hospital in our, still recovering. And, after Trinity died in the NICU, we had friends that went to our apartment, our condo, and stocked our fridge, stocked our freezer. We had friends that went and picked up family from the airport. We had friends that basically helped with the memorial service, that went to the funeral home and helped deal with the remains in the memorial service. So those are ways that people can help people that are agreed that, like I said, they're barely functional. The last thing they're going to want to do is talk to a funeral home.
Yeah, people have no idea there's almost no words to describe how awful it is to have to go to a funeral home and pick out your child's casket and talk about the service and that sort of thing. And it's surreal.
Now, we had to do that, but we had a friend that did all the legwork. And one thing that people have to, I mean, if you want to help somebody, you have to almost kind of anticipate what those people need. Because if you ask them, what do you need? They have no idea what they need. They, like I said, they're barely functional. They don't know what they need. They need you to know what they need. So,
That's well put. That
yeah,
is very well put. And you guys are really blessed to have people like that in your lives who are able to take so much of that off your plates. You guys, I'm sure, will never ever forget what those people did.
no, definitely not.
Yeah. And those are the kind of people that if you have a need at 2 o'clock in the morning, those are the people that you can call, and they make all the difference. Yeah, I want to circle back to something you said a few minutes ago. For different people, trying to figure out how to navigate and process that grief in the early days can just, I mean, it can just be completely overwhelming. And I know that for Stacey, she had a relationship with Jesus in place already. And so she leaned on him. But you shared with me that was not really the case with you. And you talk about that in that chapter in the book as well. And so, Richard, for you in those early days, how did you deal with handling all of that? Because, as men, we tend to be protectors and defenders. We're the ones who try to or want to fix everything. And when something like that happens, you realize that any of that control that you thought that you had was just an illusion, and you can't fix this. And I think a lot of times we end up angry and frustrated and just feeling like a failure in some respects. What did that look like for you? Where did you turn? What did you turn to for help?
I mean, yeah, it was, I felt helpless. There was certainly a lot of anger. There was just, I even kind of blamed myself a little bit at times because I think Stacey talked about this in the book, but Stacey had there was like a cyst on, or like a bubble or something like that on the umbilical cord. And they're like, well, we're going to induce labor early just because we want to be able to control it just in case that pops or something like that. And I remember being uncomfortable with doing an early delivery. I'm like, I think she should let her cook for a little bit longer. And I remember being uncomfortable with that. And then afterwards, I'm kind of like, well, maybe I should have said something. Maybe I should have been more, emphatic about, well, I don't think this is a good idea. Let's wait another week. In the grand
Yeah.
scheme of things, it probably wasn't the issue. But other than that, I felt I felt powerless. A lot of anger. I mean, I was, like you said, Stacey grew up. We both grew up. She grew up Baptist in South Carolina. I grew up in a Catholic in Illinois, but I was kind of the Catholic that didn't like to go to church. I went to church on Christmas and Easter, kind of thing. I wouldn't say that
Right.
I wouldn't say that I had a good relationship with Christ. I never read the Bible cover to cover. When we were living in California in San Francisco, Stacey started going to a church that was in a gym, and it was a very charismatic church.
Mm-hmm.
So for me as a Catholic, I mean, I just thought they were a bunch of weirdos, raising hands and speaking in tongues and all that kind of stuff. And
Right.
I'm not going there. That was my excuse to be able to go do other stuff when Stacey would go to church. So I didn't go to church with her. I didn't have a relationship with Christ. And when that happened in the hospital, there's one picture in the book of Stacey. And we had a friend who was a photographer. She came up to take pictures of the birth and ended up just basically taking pictures of the aftermath. And we have the only few pictures we have of Trinity that were thanks to our friend Joanne. And there was this picture she took of Stacey in the bed. All of her friends from church were surrounding her, and I'm like on my knees, like with my head kind of like on the bed. And
I saw that photo.
Yeah, they're praying for Stacey there. And Stacey didn't know it then, but I told her, I said I was like gritting my teeth and cursing God because I was just so mad. And it for these people to be praying, and I'm like, what do you, our daughter died, and I'm like, so I was mad. I mean, I questioned God's existence. I questioned, like, why? How could God do this? Why would God do this? And I was powerless. I was helpless. I was mad. Stacey, sought comfort in God. She ran to God, and I ran. I wouldn't say I ran away, but I definitely put my arms up and were like, yeah, I don't even know if you're there. And it was a struggle. I mean, that's another thing that I kind of, and I'm grateful that we made it through that, because, we were certainly not equally yoked in the faith at that time.
Yeah.
And, I didn't want to go to church with her. I went to church with her a couple times here and there, mostly just to support her, but not because I really, wanted to be there. Eventually, and those people did some amazing things too. They actually put on a memorial service for Trinity as well. And, they had the space and everything and took care of all the arrangements. All we had to do was show up. And I started kind of opening up to that. And I remember being at somebody's house, and I'm almost certain it was Good Friday. And we were at somebody's house that was from the church. And I kind of had an epiphany. I don't think it was, or a revelation. I don't think it's one that's very unique. I'm sure I'm not the first one to have this revelation. But, I kept asking myself, how could God let this happen? How could God take our daughter? Was it something I did? Was I going to be a bad dad or something like that? I mean, all these questions. And I finally had this thought, and I'm like, how could God take our daughter? And my thought was, how could he let our daughter die? And then the epiphany I had was, he let his own son die for our sin.
Yeah.
And that was kind of like, that was a turning point for me. And I think after that, I started going to church. I started going to that church with all those, those
strange people,
those charismatic weirdos, and I was, and I was fine with that. They were great people. And
don't you love God's sense of humor?
Yeah, I mean, I was born again in San Francisco. That's like being born again in Sodom. But I mean, I started going to church. I started going to like men's small groups, and we had it was just great. It was just really great. And then I remember I would go up to the front for altar calls all the time. I felt like I really needed lots of prayer because I was still going through a lot of pain. And there was a guy there. His name's Javier, and he does prophetic ministry now still in the Bay Area. And this is when he was just one of the, I don't know, not elders, but one of the kind of like the prayer people at church. And I went up for prayer one time, and he said, I remember everything he said. The only thing I remember he said was, you will be doubly blessed. And we lost Trinity on February 13th, 2006. And in August of 2000, we had twin boys. So
wow.
I mean, it was probably not more than a couple months after Javier gave us this prophetic word or gave me this prophetic word. Stacey wasn't there for that, but that we had twins. And I even had friends who were, atheists or agnostic that when they heard that, they're like, whoa.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. I mean,
when they found out we were having twins, they're like, whoa. So
no words.
But I mean, it's that faith journey has really impacted our lives too, because now we're on the same page. And I say that in my little chapter too. And I'm like, where would we be if that hadn't happened?
Yeah.
Maybe our daughter died so that we would all be saved, that her brothers would be saved, that I would be supportive of my wife, who is now very involved in prayer ministry and the board at a Christian school and all this stuff. And would she have been able to do that if she had a husband who was a tool that didn't support her or that opposed her or mocked her faith or anything like that? Our boys go to a Christian school. Our boys they want to go to a Christian college. Our faith is now a center point of our life, and it wouldn't be if not for the sacrifice of our daughter.
Yeah, I think it points back once again. I mean, these are such familiar situations of God's goodness. And if you're listening and you're thinking, how at this point, we're a few weeks in, a few days in, how could anything good come of this? And I'm thinking about Romans 8:28, where it talks about how God can take all things and use it together for good in the lives of his people, the people who know and love him. And you can see that in retrospect. You can't see it in those early days when you're still in a state of shock and you've been traumatized. But this is what you were just talking about, how God can take something so traumatic, a loss that's so heavy that it's the source of so much pain, and look at the good he's brought out of it. Was that event a good thing? No.
No.
But look what God's brought out of that. And you just described all of that. I hear these stories so often, Richard, of the good that God brings out of that. And you guys know that, I mean, your story didn't end with death. Your story ended really with life, because Trinity, you know as well as I do, is more alive now with Jesus in heaven than she was here.
Absolutely. Did Stacey, I don't know if she sent you anything, but she actually did a painting too.
Yes, I love that painting. Just describe that for our listeners.
So Stacey had a vision of Trinity swinging on a cross, and she named the painting "Because He is Risen, She is Risen." And it's a big painting. I'm actually looking at the original right now, and it's amazing.
It is.
And she's definitely using that gift. And it's fun. It's interesting that like she has sold prints of that painting, and I think the first two prints of that painting that she sold were to women who had abortions and who regretted having those abortions, and the painting was therapeutic for them because they had both lost daughters.
I can see where that would be the case, because I've seen that painting. And it's a very profound, in its simplicity, it's a very profound story. I mean, that you can see in that one scene.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You talked about something very bad happening, a tragic event, and not knowing what good can come from it. And I feel very blessed that I kind of have at least a partial idea of some good things that have come from our loss, and the fact that we're able to share that with other people, help other people through that grief, the fact that it has impacted our faith, and that may have impact in other ways too. And who knows what's going to happen with her brothers that are going to be going off to college in a few years. So it's, I've had the privilege of being able to see some of the positive impacts, and I won't know the full impact of her loss, the full positive impact, until I'm able to see her again in heaven and Jesus can give me the download on what the whole plan was. But
you'll probably be blown away.
It will be. And, it's, but the faith too has given us some really amazing, the experience has given us some amazing faith that's gotten through some other rough times, like, unemployment and stuff like that. It's just, when I see what God had done through our loss, It's like not much. What else is going to rock me like that? And it's weird to say that it's been a blessing in disguise.
I understand that. And I think other parents who have been through this can understand that. If you're listening and you haven't experienced it, but you have a friend who has, or a family member, you may not completely be able to understand that, but it absolutely is true. It is very true. So let me ask you this, Richard. We all now live a before and after life. The life that we had before our loss and the life that we now have after. And if we have a relationship with the Lord, I do think that it opens our eyes to some of the characteristics of God, who he really is, as opposed to who we thought he was in that before life. What have you learned about him since you guys lost Trinity that you didn't know about him before?
I didn't really know him before. All I knew was, the sayings I would memorize going to a Catholic mass, or, stuff like that. I didn't know God. I didn't know Christ. I didn't read the Bible. But what I do know now is that God's ways are greater than ours. His understanding is greater than ours. And, it's God. Was it Romans the 8:28 that you mentioned, works all things out for good? It's true. It's definitely true. And sometimes we may not understand it, and sometimes we still may question it, or some people may question it, because bad things still do happen, and we live in a fallen world. But I just know that God is God. I don't know how to describe it any more than he is the all-knowing, all-powerful God. And God is great all the time, and all the time God is great.
Yes, he is. Absolutely. Well said. Now, Richard, I'm sure that there's a dad who's in an early season of grief listening to us today, having been there, having walked through a long season of grief. Is there anything that you would like to say to that man today, to that dad who just needs a word from somebody who's been there?
Oh boy.
Yeah, I know I put you on the spot here.
Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Just a word. I don't know if I could give you just a word, but I would say that you will get through it. To just be patient, be there for your wife, be patient, be kind, be loving, be there for each other. And it's going to take time, and it's going to hurt. It's going to hurt real bad for probably a while, and it's probably not ever going to completely go away, but you'll get through it. Focus on your family. If I looked at a book right now, if I looked at Stacey's book right now and looked at those pictures, I'd probably tear up right now. And, there's probably been times where I've given a testimony about it in the last couple of years where, I have broken down. So the pain's not going to go away, but that's okay. Don't let the pain define you. Get through the pain and become a better person because of it. Better father, a better husband. Don't let the pain define you, and it's not your fault either.
Yeah, that good words. Very well said. There's nothing I could add to that, really. Thank you for that perspective, Richard. And Richard, it has been an absolute honor and privilege to have you on our podcast today. And I just so much appreciate your honesty and transparency and giving our listeners a glimpse into the world of a grieving dad. I think that's really important that people understand the heart of a dad as well as the heart of a mom.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me, Greg. And thank you for all you do and the podcasts that you do, the different talks you have with different people, because everybody grieves differently. Everybody's going to have a different perspective. My perspective is not the end all be all of all perspectives. And it's certainly not the end all be all of all fathers. People are going to grieve differently, and it's good to have support. It's good to have other people that have gone through where you can be like, okay, I identify with that. And that really resonates with me. So it's great that you do this, because there are so many there's so much information out there that people can get to help them get through these tough times.
Yeah. I appreciate those words, and it is indeed a privilege for me to be able to do this. And I think what you just said demonstrates once again that every story is important because every single story matters to God.
Amen.
Thank you again, Richard.
All right. Thanks, Greg.
Well, thank you for joining us today. If you would like to offer your thoughts on today's episode, simply click the link under the episode summary. And if you're interested in sharing your story on a future episode, email us using the provided link. Join us again in 2 weeks to hear another story of how God meets us in our pain, creates something beautiful from the broken pieces, and restores meaning, purpose, and hope.